Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we are going to start out talking a little bit about a book called The Way to Live, which, of course, we've brought up many times before. And this is on page 330. And I haven't had a whole lot of time to contemplate this, so maybe I can comment a little bit, but not that much yet. Page 30, The Way to Live. All things and matters and powers of the spirit and of the material consciousness are impalpable in their existence, and their constitution is of such a kind that they often appear like castles in the air and mirages, or like apparitions in dreams. So your spirit and your material consciousness are not material, even though the material consciousness is called material. They are without material essence, but they nevertheless have characteristics which can be perceived. The powers of the spirit and of the consciousness are able to influence and move both that which is fine fluidal as well as that which is coarse substantial, and in their form they are immortal. So what that means is the power of your spirit and your consciousness will eventually be able to move things, telekinesis. And there are stories in the Maya material that talk about teleportation, and I think an Ishwish at some level can even do teleportation. So we have a lot of things that will happen in the future once we develop the ability to do these things. So let me go back to here. It says, all things, matters and powers of the material life are palpable. That means you can feel them and can be felt or otherwise materially noticeable in their existence, so you can see them, and have a kind of constitution such that they are either visible or can be made visible and audible with aids. All that which is spiritual and consciousness-based, as well as all that which is coarse substantial, are forms of existence which can be perceived in one kind or another, and which actually exist in their kind and constitution, and are no illusion. Because truthfully, there exists both the fine fluidal as well as the coarse substantial. The coarse substantial is the physical world. The fine fluidal is the energy that comes from our mind, which is absorbed by everything in your periphery, like your books, your furniture, your instruments, if you have any, the walls, the trees around your home, all absorb the fine fluidal energies related to your consciousness. So we have the coarse substantial and the fine fluidal. Both of these exist. All that which is spiritual and consciousness-based, as well as all that which is coarse substantial, are forms of existence which can be perceived in one kind or another, and which actually exist in their kind and constitution and are no illusion, because truthfully there exists both the fine fluidal as well as coarse substantial, which in themselves are each a oneness, and again produce a oneness joined together. So there's a oneness associated with the physical body and the fine fluido energies associated with our material consciousness and our spirit form. The fine fluido is the positive, and the coarse substantial is the negative. So the physical world is the negative. Remember, the negative and the positive are two forces which belong together and should never be separated. The fine fluido is the positive, and the coarse substantial is the negative. In this form, they are actually existent, and that which is not only how it appears, rather in reality. I thought that was very profound, a little bit of information, and I think it ties into what we'll talk about in a little bit. Let me continue. Often the results and effects of a human being's deeds may not yet be fully mature. So the effects of something you've done may not have fully had an effect on your life yet. But when the suitable happenings and the right circumstances arise, then they unfold in every case and unavoidably bring the logical result. Every deed and action, every thought, every emotion, and every feeling shows quite particular results which are attuned to them. So every feeling, every thought, every emotion, every action has a result. The human being very often forgets his or her feelings, thoughts, and emotions, deeds, and actions. But the resulting outcomes and effects certainly come to light, even though it often takes a very long time, even if years or decades pass. I'll give a real easy example. A person that is an alcoholic may not have liver problems for 20 or 30 years. However, the human being does not think about that. Consequently, the causes of such results and effects remain concealed from him or her, and she is no longer in a position to bring the newly attained results and effects into connection with the actual cases. Two concepts, two profound passages on page 330 in the Way to Live book. I think they, in a roundhouse sort of way, kind of shed some light on some things we're going to talk about today. If I can find my notes here. Oh, here we go. The title for today is That Which is Bad and Negative Once Created Does Not Simply Disappear. So we were talking about there, things taking decades to sometimes manifest. And we were also talking about the spiritual being as real as the physical, but is not always able to be perceived in normal ways. So on page 284 of the Might of Thoughts, it says, that which is bad and negative once created does not simply disappear again. Rather, it stores itself in the overall consciousness block, which I believe is a storage bank in the spirit realm, and that's where your spirit is processing what you've learned in the previous life. But also, it stores itself in the planetary storage banks. So let me repeat that. That which is bad and negative once created does not simply disappear again. Rather, it stores itself in the overall consciousness block and in planetary storage banks, from where the human being can consciously or unconsciously and subconsciously call it up over and over again and allow it to become the motivating power and might, and indeed during the course of many reincarnations. So you can, say you have a bad and negative thought that you created. It doesn't just disappear. It can go into the planetary storage banks. And you can call it up later in your life, in this life. You can call it up multiple times. Or in the next life, you can do the same thing. And you can have this negative, bad thought exist more than one lifetime, over many reincarnations. So that's how important it is to monitor what you think. I think, and I suspect, that also what is good and positive can be stored in the planetary storage banks, and you can consciously pull that up over and over again. And wouldn't that be a much better thing to do than have negative things stored in the planetary storage banks and come back to haunt you over and over again? And I'm sure I do that. I'm sitting here bringing myself into this. I know that I have certain relived feelings and thoughts that I've literally planted in the storage banks now. They're going to return over and over again. So your psyche is colored according to your thoughts. So, and that means that your thoughts affect a color with a U, COLOUR, can be defined as interesting or exciting qualities or details. But that which you consciously want for your life, you can also pathologically force into being. And I think that which you don't necessarily want either, if you keep focused on certain things like that you can pathologically force that into being. So I bet you if a person, and this is a bad example because people are going to remember this, but some people, I think they fear like a disease, and they have this big fear of this disease, and they continually focus on that, and they can pathologically force that into being, which would be a terrible thing. The psyche is that which controls the consciousness, material, conscious-based thoughts and feelings. So, and the psyche has a counterpart called the Gemut, and the Gemut controls the thoughts and feelings of the spiritual consciousness. Whatever you think about intensively, it grows in you and eventually becomes fact. But there's something deeper. And indeed, the fact that environmental influences play a role, and your personal subliminal desires, which can rise up from uncontrolledness. And these are thoughts and feelings that are subliminal, and they can arise from when you're being uncontrolled, and they lie in wait, and they bring up bad and negative things, and they penetrate your thoughts, and they control your thoughts, and this can cause damage. So be careful what you intensively concentrate on. And intensively means extreme concentration or effort, thoroughly or vigorously thinking about something. If we intensively think about something, it becomes more and more likely that it will become a fact. And a fact is something that has actual existence. And subliminal means below the threshold of your awareness. A subliminal thing is below the threshold of the sensation of the consciousness. So it can affect your mind without you being aware of it. A desire is a strong feeling or wanting to have something or wishing for something. And it can be a subliminal desire, which again is below the threshold of your even awareness. Again, this stuff is really amazing. Ask it comments on the negative desires of Earth humans. And at some point in our future, if I'm interpreting this correctly, she says that thus their death-bringing intrigues and desires for power will ultimately be transformed toward good purposes. So some of these evil elites and all their negative plans will actually, unbeknownst to them, have some good outcomes. But once you put a bad and negative thing out there, it stores itself in the planetary storage banks, and you can pull that up in future lifetimes, unconsciously or subconsciously, over and over again. And you can even pull it up subconsciously or unconsciously in this lifetime. And when you have this wrong thinking, it leads to this oversaturation and an absence of creativity and a lack of ideas, a lack of initiative. So if you're having good initiative, stick with what you're doing. Keep focused, keep moving, because unsatisfaction kills motivation, it kills striving. You start to feel oversaturated. And oversaturation means to soak thoroughly or completely. It means to unite with the greatest amount another substance. Unsatisfaction sets in when we're oversaturated. I oversaturated myself last night with clips on YouTube about war. They had some amazing, 20-minute clips from films, and you don't see that very much on YouTube anymore. And these are with the most, we've made some incredibly brutal, realistic depictions of warfare. And of course, in my incredible wisdom, I sit there oversaturating myself with all this negativity. So, unsatisfaction is connected with a lack of creativity. If you're experiencing a very creative time in your life, then you usually have satisfaction. On the other hand, if you're not having creativity, you usually have unsatisfaction. And I just pulled this up in my notes here, and it's talking about faith. And the Meyer material says faith and sometimes prayer can torment the conscious and unconscious with anxiety, and fear. So what we need to use is logic in the form of deductive reasoning to start to explain things in the world around us, so we don't use and try to explain things in terms of activities of angels or demons or God. And we have a tendency as human beings to have very big highs and lows. And that's discussed on page 288 in The Might of Thoughts. So let me read a little bit. It says here, only intellect and rationality are required for that, and a will created thereby to also do that which is necessary. Indeed, human beings sometimes have difficult or even very difficult times with themselves, with their fellow human beings, or simply with the environment in and of itself. They often feel high or low, so that they are jumping with joy one minute and are in the depths of despair the next. Boy, that should be a red flag for you. If you feel yourself going to those kind of extremes, then you probably have confused ideas. And when they are really low, then they are actually feel so miserable and helpless that they want to die. This is where suicide comes in. However, none of these moods are ever a reason for not dealing with life according to one's own best ability and capacity, and steering it along the right path. Remember, you want to steer your thoughts like a captain steers his ship, and forming the inner nature. And that's what we're trying to do here, is to form our inner nature, such that a personality arises which accords with creation and the true human being. So if we resist the creational impulses, then our inner nature does not form according to creation. It starts to form differently. And I briefly touched on this a couple of shows ago. And it's not as clear in my mind as I would like it to be, but our spirit form impulses us, and if we pay attention to those impulses, we're fine. If we don't pay attention to those impulses, then we start to have problems. And you have to decide for yourself when you're getting impulses, creational impulses. I can think of some examples in my life that they impulse me to be creative, and I follow that urge for creativity to do whatever it is that I'm being impulsed to do. And if I follow that, almost compulsively follow it, then it seems to be much better. Now, if I don't really listen to those creational impulses, then you're not striving in the right way. You know, it can lead to some really, really unhealthy things. So let me continue here. To build up one's own inner nature in line with the creation nature, and to do it progressively as well as neutral, positive, equalize, and to, in fact, also then know this nature and live true to its constitution actually means living. So when you're getting impulses, creational impulses, which you can call impulses to be creative, that makes it easier to understand. I mean, now that you know about the universal consciousness, I can say creational impulses, then you know that those impulses are usually creative, or sometimes creative anyway, and they have a creative aspect to them. Even if you're being impulsed, you may be impulsed to organize your garage, for example. And it is also certain that whoever has built up his or her inner nature with the impulses of the innermost creational nature and has caused it to blossom can love himself in all honesty and deference without thereby falling into negative and bad states. So we fall into these negative and bad states when we screen out, we ignore these creational impulses. Connecting with that is knowing oneself. Consequently, the effective facts of the newly formed and creationally directed inner nature must therefore first be recognized and accepted before practical and respectful love can come about for it. However, once this is done and once the human being is true to himself or herself, and that's what you're doing. If you're following the creational impulses, you're being true to yourself. And in this kind and wise, then soon a fundamental harmony grows inside you, which along with love also contains joy, peace, and inner freedom. That's one thing you get is a lot of this great inner freedom. So we're talking about very subtle things here, and hopefully over time we can find ways to make it even clearer. However, if the human being remains separated from himself or herself, by disregarding his or her inner nature and not forming it such that it conforms with the creational natural laws and recommendations, then he separates himself, so to speak, from his or her own life because as a result of not developing him or herself higher. He or she distances himself from real life, that is to say, from his or her own real self. If you have a talent to do something, you, I think, be eventually impulsed to do that. If you don't develop that aspect of yourself, whatever that talent is, then you will eventually feel distanced from yourself, from your real self, separated from your real self. alienated from your real self. The inner nature from the factor of the actual personality comes forth. And if by means of his or her own will the human being lives apart from his or her real self, apart from the actual inner nature, which the human being must him or herself develop creationally, then in fact one cannot say that in that case the inner self can be positively given full expression. Because with this self, one is truly only dealing with the fake self, or ersatz self, which the human being is responsible for acquiring. See, we go through life, this is scary. I can see, whoa, this could be horrible. You go through life, you're resisting these creational impulses. They're impulses for creativity. They're impulses to strive in certain ways. And you follow the crowd, you follow society, and then over time you develop this false self. And you think this is yourself, but it's not yourself. And that false self, it's probably not very happy. Let me continue. Then the human being himself or herself is responsible for acquiring, and which is only imprinted according to that which is short-lived, not idolized ideas create and express, and which cannot be realized. The unnatural state, so you're in this unnatural state, which works against the creational natural impulses and laws, can naturally satisfy no human being in the long term. So I think that's what's happening in society a lot. A lot of people they don't even recognize what the creational impulses are anymore. And they're living lives where they're not in the right field. And you can say, I think I don't want to be dogmatic about this. I think if you're open, your talents and creational impulses can be followed, and they may not be. You may not be devoting as much time as you'd like to these creational impulses, but as long as you're developing them, as long as you're listening to them, eventually your life will become better and better, I think. So, so this is some very, very interesting ideas. So you're in this unnatural state. It works against the creational natural impulses. You cannot be satisfied in the long term. And we talked about the dangers of unsatisfaction. Consequently, he or she inevitably becomes unsatisfied with him or herself and gets out of alignment in some form, which naturally brings him or her inequity and harm, is an unavoidable consequence. This inequity and harm. Thus the human being no longer likes himself. You won't like yourself anymore. I feel this because I go through this a little bit at times. Why? For one reason or another, I don't have a lot of initiative, tired for whatever reason. And you stop striving as much. You kind of become sluggish, and you don't like yourself as much because you're like, gosh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. It concerns what's called the self-created unnatural inner nature. That's the inner self. So we are creating an unnatural inner nature. But once you go into your innermost creational self, and if that starts to form your inner nature, then your actual self and your personality live according to the impulses of your innermost self and striving urge. So you start close to your striving urge. Then he or she becomes a human being who is really living according to creation. And he or she becomes one with creational power, which she can utilize because he or she is able to create it in himself or herself. So these are kind of really profound thoughts, which I think we'll have to really focus on for a while for them to become real clear. I want to take a little diversion into what I think maybe is my most favorite part of the Meyer material, because I think it's maybe something I pulled out of the storage banks, maybe something that comes from a previous life. Who knows? And it's from something called Love Teaching Letter number 27, page 296. It says, love is the highest principle of creation, and through it, everything exists in absolute logic. The love of creation is everywhere, because without it, nothing at all would be able to exist. So if you look at creation, if you look at the natural world, everything exists in an absolute logic. The plants, they produce oxygen for the animals and the human beings. The plants create an environment which the forest moderates the weather. It keeps it cooler in the summer in the shady areas, and it keeps it a little bit warmer in the winter, because otherwise the snow and ice would reflect back a lot of heat. The forests cause the winds. The winds create a turbulence when they blow over the top of the forest, which actually forms clouds and helps rain, which stops drought. The roots of the plants stop soil erosion and slow down and de-intensify floods. So everything exists in absolute logic in creation. That includes what you might call a normal forest where I live, or a desert forest like the kinds you see in Arizona, or a rainforest in Brazil. There's all these different kinds of vegetation. There is these tremendous grasslands in Africa, and I did a lot. I stumbled across some information. The grasslands in Africa would not exist. They don't exist. In fact, they turn into desert without the wild animals. The wild animals move at a speed, and their dung dropped across an area creates a fertilized soil. Now, with livestock from human beings, the livestock moves too slowly, and it grazes too much, and it destroys the grasslands in Africa. So the zebras and the elephants and the impalas and the lions and the hyenas, all these things create the environment. They're one with the environment. They create the grasslands. So all of these things in creation, they exist in absolute logic. And the love of creation is everywhere. It radiates outward. So we need to be aware that only through the love of creation that we exist, and we carry this love inside us. And creation created everything in love and logic, and put that same love in all its creatures. Every tiny plant and every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love. If you have cats or kittens or dogs or puppies, you'll see this same love in all those creatures. We have created a world that contains a lot of drudgery and conflict. And a lot of this is because we've destroyed the creation around us. The bulldozers have come in and destroyed the trees, and there's some horrific examples of this around where I live now, where some of the utility companies have come in and just hacked trees right in half for hundreds of yards. It looks like a war zone. It's just staggering. When Billy was a young boy, he crawled out a lower window in May. I think it was in the late 30s, early 40s. He was very young, about 4 years old, and looked up at a beautiful starry sky, and he said, I recognized that the light which the stars emitted was a light in the visible spectrum, however, that the light of true love remains invisible, creational, and for all great time. Now, this is a 4-year-old boy with a 9.6 billion-year-old spirit. However, suddenly something peculiar happened inside of me, which from the next moment irrevocably changed my whole life. And Billy talks about this in a writing called How It All Began. And he describes it. He says, strangely touched, I look at my hands and my body and could only vaguely recognize them. So I touched my body and felt it. And then I heard my own voice say, and this is almost like his spirit, his inner creational nature has taken over. At only 4 years old, it's amazing. And he says, my life is made out of the love of creation, and that had to be something that came from Nocadamian millions, maybe billions of years ago when he lived on one of these other worlds. And it says here, and I could not explain why I said that, 4-year-old boy again, and which power led me to speak these words. A slight shiver came over me, which is understandable because there's such a shock to some of this information. Although the night was quite warm, and then I noticed that I also felt peculiar, nevertheless, I was not frightened. And Billy goes on to write, and again I looked up at the stars and recognized that the stars were distant suns in the vast outer space, and that these shone by means of their own power by themselves, even though they were created from the light of the love of creation, as is everything in the whole universe. So, again, Billy speaks, and he's 4 years old, and he even says here, I could not decipher where this came from. And he said, everything is created out of the light of love. And then further words followed. It's a 4-year-old boy saying this, but it's actually a 9.6 billion-year-old spirit that's inspiring these words. And he says, the space between the stars is empty and yet not empty. And everything that exists in the whole universe is a living vison. Everything is creation and creation itself. And then Billy talks about, and this is very interesting, because he talks about these words that came from his own mouth. They penetrated deeply into him. And so remember, there's a material consciousness. This young boy is only 4 years old, has material consciousness. But his 9.6 billion-year-old spirit has inspired him to say something. And the impact of those words came back and hit his material consciousness. And they penetrated deeply into him. And he recognized that the true source of life is the true creational love, which in its vitality creates all life and contains within itself all the laws and recommendations of creational order and all the information about life and death. Now, notice, it says here that everything is created out of the light of love. Does it mean that life is an aspect of love, literally? Or is it that light is used as a metaphor here? Or could it be that, to an extent, light is an aspect of the love of creation? You know, all animals respond to light. Perhaps there is a visible and an invisible aspect to light. And I think light, it plays a role in the creation of everything. And in the passage there, which we read earlier, it says, everything is created out of the light of love. And think about that, because, your thinking starts to change profoundly when you're contemplating the love of creation. And it's the total opposite of negative thoughts, which grow wildly and create a suffering and confusion. And one of the passages that I read there, I've lost it, but somewhere it said absolute. It talked about absolute, which implies an unquestioned finality. And we talked about logic and related to the love of creation. Love is the highest principle in all creation. And everything exists in absolute logic. And logic is the proper way of thinking about something. And it also means the science of formal principles of reasoning. And without the love of creation, nothing would be able to exist. And existence means to have an objective reality or a being. And in relationship to logic, Contact Report 10 says this, which is pretty profound. It says, the love of creation is everywhere, because without it, nothing at all would be able to exist. The individual should therefore be aware that he exists only through the love of creation, and he carries this love also within himself. And all of nature in its indescribable splendor is nothing but the love of creation, which is expressed visibly. Its laws are so wonderfully arranged that people everywhere come up against its radiating love. Love will continuously be the purpose of existence, and all timely in its given logic. Some of that may have came from Contact Report 10, some of it may have come from Love Letter 27. I may have blurred those two together. So what is nature? Nature is the natural world without human beings or civilization. Nature is the elements of the natural world: mountains, trees, animals, rivers. Schöpfung is the German word for creation. The German word for splendor is Pracht. Splendor can mean a great and impressive beauty. There's a very unpronounceable German word, which I'm not going to try right now to pronounce, which is translated as indescribable. And indescribable means too extraordinary for description. Let me continue in Love Letter 27. Each smallest plant, each ever so tiny animal is created in love by creation, each creation existing according to the same law of love. All life is in the absolute perfection, which it should be through the love of creation, except for humans. Now, humans, we have a free will. All of nature is programmed to behave in a certain way. And this is the programming of nature we sometimes call instincts. Now, we have a programming within us, too, that we should follow, and it's love. Even the predator-prey relationship somehow fits into this, which is a little bit crazy and hard for us to gather and wrap our minds around. Our kitty cats can be loving one minute and then off in an instant to go kill the bird. But we as humans, we can turn away from creation's plan, and we don't live by creation's plan, and we literally forget what true love is. And the infinite love of creation, and I think that's what is the amazing thing, is that the creation's love, although it has no personality, its love is infinite, and it connects all life. And all of life has this love. Now, the universe that we live in is the material manifestation of the wisdom of creation. And wisdom is a kind of knowledge that produces energy. And when we produce wisdom and its associated energy, we help the whole creation to evolve. So you merely concentrating on these words and learning helps all of nature. Humans have turned away from love, and we must learn again what true love is. The purpose of human love is to acquire wisdom. Love and wisdom belong together because the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. Semyase said that in Contact Report 10. And there's an interesting article that I believe Billy wrote that says the Earth human speaks of a love he does not know. And listen to what Billy says here. Reverence, human of the earth, is the fundamental element of all existence. So it is therefore also the fundamental element of love itself, which is built on this all-embracing reverence. So you develop this tremendous reverence for nature. And you would naturally not run a bulldozer over a beautiful wooded area. That's how insane we are. We're such a mentally ill society. And so if we had the fundamental element of love, reverence, and this is so true, it would be impossible that love, once awakened and once built up in truthfulness, could ever weaken again or become cold or translate or transform into hate or be annihilated. So Semyase in the spiritual teachings reiterated certain concepts over and over. She said wisdom is a distinguishing feature of creation that as a fragment exists in our human spirit. She said we should increase our search for the truth, and then we would start to know the power of wisdom and the fact that wisdom and truth brings a liberation from all restrictions. And the law of love is the basic law of all creational laws. And this law embodies the basic law for everyone on earth. So if you do not exercise universal love, you offend against this directive, this order. So love in the universal sense alone enables the bringing forth of the required power for the attainment of knowledge, wisdom, and truth, through which altogether an abandoning of all pure, worldly, negative, and degenerative things in striving. So when we truly embrace love, everything that's degenerate and worldly, or degenerated, let's say, we will let go. And what is love? Love is the absolute certainty that one lives with and coexists with everything. Thus, in everything which exists, in the fauna and the flora, in the fellow humans, in every material and spiritual life form, no matter which kind, and in the existence of the entire universe itself. Anyway, a bit of a side tangent there into teachings about love. Let me pick up in the book, actually, let's pick up in the book called The Way to Live. And let's talk about modesty a little bit. It says here that true modesty in every regard is valuable virtue of humaneness. Now remember, modesty is not submissiveness. True modesty in every regard is the valuable virtue of the humaneness, which makes the human being deserving of honor and respect. However, immodesty makes one ugly, insatiable, unpopular, insincere as well as wasteful, and leads to one being exploited. You know, Billy's a tremendously modest person, if you think about it. Deep grief, as well as sorrow, worries, wrong thoughts, and wrong feelings lead to the disregarding and violation of that which is good. Now think about this again, folks. If you find yourself falling into sorrow for any reason, if you start having wrong thoughts, you're headed for big trouble. So deep grief, sorrow, worries, wrong thoughts, and wrong feelings lead to the disregarding and violation of all that which is good, the truth, and the positive. Also to valuable morals and traditions being embarrassingly degenerated and neglected. So you wouldn't think that sorrow and worry would lead to this, but it leads to an embarrassing degenerated state. A truly peace-loving human avoids quarreling. Another thing, all these shows on television, all these things on YouTube, where they have these debates, you know, these shows with quarreling. Fox News is a good example of that. Truly peace-loving humans avoid the quarreling. But if it is unavoidable, then the peace-loving one remains correct and polite. Because even in the quarreling, he remains a peace lover. You notice our whole country has devolved into the left and the right, which are in a constant state of quarreling. If a human being recognizes that which is right and nevertheless does not do it, he shows that courage lies fallow in him or has not yet been born in him. If the human being creates an idol, and if he or she runs after one, if a human being creates a belief or falls prey to one, then he or she gives up his or her own thinking, actions, and his or her own freedom. Well, let me read this about love. This is human love that isn't so healthy all the time. If the human being is enveloped in a breath-thin tissue of love, then he or she may devote himself or herself to it and preserve it. He or she shall not pay attention to the blades of the swords and the thorns of the bushes which hem the love's wayside. This is false love, and try to injure the breath upon which surges with love. If the human being shall not pay attention to the possible wounds which can thereby be torn, rather he or she shall understand and recognize only the love and know about it. So this is true love here he's talking about. Effective love, love based on reverence. True love is strong and is even able to destroy dreams and shatter wishes, just as the icy north wind withers the blossoms, because just as the love crowns the human being, and this is the false love, this is the romantic love, it also tortures him or her. And the love tortures because inherent to it are renunciation and demands. Have you ever noticed that? If a person has a false love, Do you ever have family out there or whatever, they make unrealistic demands on you? I notice that. Into which the human being also has to integrate him or herself, which often very much go against his will. Thus, the love allows the human being to grow in order to nevertheless also curtail him in many things of life, but truthfully integrates him or herself into the love. The love allows the human being to rise to the highest heights towards the light of the radiating sun, so that he or she may caress the tenderest blossoms. But just as quickly, he or she may fall again to sink into the soil and shake the roots of the plants into their earth-boundedness. So there's these tremendous highs and lows in romantic love rather than universal love. This false love I'm talking about here, remember the contrast. The love of creation, sensing the radiating love of creation. A love based on reverence and respect. Very stable. Never changes. It's wonderful. But there's romantic love, which is nice, but it can be very unstable. Listen to this. This love clothes the human being or makes him completely naked. It cleanses him or makes him dusty in order to then immediately let him or her freeze in the cold or warm in the heat. Again, very unstable romantic love. In the love, the human being is like a grain which is threshed, sifted, and freed from the chaff to then be ground into a meal and kneaded until supple, after which the controlled heat raises the leavening and bakes a loaf of bread, which is as love nourishes all. Yet much more comes forth from the human being from love, so that he or she gets to know the true love and makes it his or her own in her life. And then Billy kind of spells it out here. He says, unfortunately, the human being often only searches for love out of anxiety and to find calmness, pleasure, and gratification. However, this is the wrong way and a wrong form of the love, which is only artificially created in order to fill emotional or lustful wishes. There we are with the romantic love. In this form of the love, it is better for the human being if he or she covers the nakedness of his or her greed and searches for the true value of the love. In order to find the way out of his or her world without seasons, which only conveys monotony, and in which he or she laughs without being able to enjoy it, and in which he or she cries without shedding tears, which bring him or her true release. True love is the concentrated form of fine spiritual perception and is not built upon emotions. Because truthfully, it is a fine spiritual perception itself. Therefore, love itself is not only power, never takes anything which would not be of itself. So that's probably a logical place to stop. True love versus false love. The Meyer material spells it out very well. I hope you're enjoying these programs. I'm enjoying giving them to you. Remember, we're talking about the writings of Edward Albert Meyer. We've been reading passages from The Way to Live and the book called The Might of Thoughts. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.